I have been the spare tire of this family for as long as I can remember. Quietly there, reliable, inflated, and taken for granted until someone else needed the trunk. My name is Monroe. I design things for other people. Invites, logos, bathroom signs for pop-up cafes. Because order is a language I speak without thinking. I answer Evan's midnight calls about broken down cars and worse, and I send money with the same click I use to order my own groceries. That clicking, bank app, invoice, done, is my small, private ritual. It makes things stop hurting for everyone else. It keeps the family household humming. It keeps me invisible in a very particular way. Evan is 32, charming in the way of people who never touch the things they broke. He has a laugh that gets him out of bills and a taste for theatrics. When he told the family he was engaged, I offered to design the invitations because he said he trusted my eye and because my work was how I said, "I'm here," without asking to be seen. I picked the paper, soft, uncoated cotton that took ink like a secret, typeset their names so they sat like friends holding hands. I proofed the vows when he babbled like a man half in love and fully in panic. I wired him money twice. Once for a deposit on a venue when his card froze, another time when his ex claimed a sudden emergency that only Evan could fix if someone else paid for it. He called me Mun, like we were roommates paying different utilities. I called it family. So the first time I notice something is wrong, it doesn't feel like a betrayal. It feels like a glitch. A cousin snaps a photo at an early spring brunch and tags the family in it. There's Evan at the head of a long table, mouth in mid-story, at a ring gleaming on his hand like a punctuation mark. The caption is effusive. The comments come in, "Congratulations," tears, "Can't wait." And in the corner of the frame, the edge of an invitation sits like evidence. I scroll the image because my brain is trained to look at the details I made, and then I look for my name. It isn't there. Not on the guest list screenshot that shows the RSVP page. Not in the photos of the estate, the floral arches, the glittering chandeliers. 120 people are laughing under a rented sky, and the digital roll call is intact, choreographed, perfect, except for a single quiet absence. No Monroe. I call him. He picks up on the third ring. His voice is the same warm veneer it's always been. "You saw the photos, right? Yeah, it was perfect. We'll do something when you're back in town." He says "will," the way people promise a polite future to sidestep the present. My throat tightens in a way that feels less like anger and more like the sudden recognition of a repeated plank missing from a floor I thought I trusted. Everything I'd signed off on, the fonts, the envelopes, the late-night wires, feels, in that instant, both honored and weaponized. The stakes slip into sharp focus. This isn't about one party. It's about how a life built on quiet service can be dismissed with a passive voice and an Instagram post. I stand in my kitchen, invitation-proof, folded on the countertop like an accusation, and the choice that lives at the intersection of dignity and impulse starts to hum. They all did the thing people do when they don't want to hurt you enough to be honest. They soften the edges until the truth disappeared. My mother, Diane, called first. Her voice was a careful knot, warmth threaded with a practiced pity. "Monroe, sweetheart, we didn't want to make a fuss. It was just a small thing. You know how Evan gets. So many people, so little time." She said it like she was tucking a truth into a drawer labeled misunderstandings. My voice said the right things. "That's fine, Mom, because she is 60, and it would cost her something to tell me she'd seen the list and omitted my name. I could have asked if it was a mistake. I could have asked Evan if he'd meant to harm me. I could have called Rowan, Evan's fiancé, who looked like a curated life on a budget of charisma. But instead, I watched the conversation shrink into safe platitudes. When Evan texted, it was the same glide of avoidance. "We'd love to do something when you're back," he wrote, the sort of future tense apology that leaves the present untouched. I stared at the message until the pixels softened. His voicemail that evening was 2 minutes of talk about speeches and seating charts and how great the caterer was. I listened the way I used to listen to him explain a bad decision, distracted, computing logistics I could fix if asked. At some point in the message, he laughed, and it shredded me more than any raised voice ever could. The laugh meant he'd rehearsed joy without me in the room. There were small cruelties stitched through the week after. Group photos where someone locked eyes with everyone but me. An offhand comment from Aunt Mara. We didn't want to make things awkward, as if not naming me was less awkward than naming me and saying the reason. Even the invitations themselves felt like evidence in an old crime I'd been ignoring. I had chosen the paper. I had recommended the font. Somewhere my handwriting had been scanned into a thing that now listed everyone worth celebrating. It felt obscene, like being thanked with a speech someone else wrote. I thought for a minute about confrontation. The imagined scene played like a badly directed commercial. I would say the words, they would say something charming and dismissive, and the family would reconfigure itself into a circle where I somehow fit again. I tried on anger, seeing if it would suit me. It felt loud and sensational and not mine. My life has always thrummed on a quieter frequency. Utility, repair, the steady clack of a keyboard at 2 a.m. I'd cross myself back into that role more easily than I'd learned to keep a chair for myself. So I did the only thing that felt like the opposite of asking permission. I booked a ticket. Not coach, not even premium economy. I bought first class because I wanted the small, impossible indulgence to be absolute. I wanted the indignity of exclusion to be answered not with a speech, but with an image. My name on a boarding pass printed in a font I chose, and money leaving my account with the same click I used to rescue Evan during his emergencies. There is a certain delicious sleight of hand to turning the language of service into the language of self. Lisbon. I picked Lisbon for its tile patterns and light that slants sideways like a secret. I picked a week that overlapped the party date and felt, when I booked it, like planting a flag in a small, private country. I reserved a window seat because first-class windows are little observatories where leaving looks like art. I splurged on a bagel and an overpriced magazine I'd never buy at home. At checkout, the credit card screen showed the total and, without melodrama, I named it. This is mine. The confirmation email arrived with a chirpy subject line. Your flight is confirmed. And for the first time in a long while, the word "your" landed on me and stayed. Packing was intentionally thin. I folded a silk scarf that smelled faintly of detergent and a hardcover book I'd promised myself I'd read. I left the invitation proofs on the kitchen counter, where they glared at me like evidence. I locked the front door with the same motion I'd used 1,000 times and, for once, didn't check my phone to see if someone had texted with a sudden change of heart. At the airport, first class felt like a different gravity. My shoes rested in a little leather footrest as if to say, you are permitted this. The flight attendant poured a glass of champagne as if offering a peace treaty. I clinked my glass to the window and thought about the small ledger of my life, the late-night transfers, the favors, the emergency keys tucked under doormats. I thought about how invisible kindness can become. The plane eased down the runway and the city I was leaving receded, not because I wanted to disappear, but because I wanted a margin. When the engines rose and the tower shrank into a punctuation mark, something inside me changed in a way I could not yet name. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't cowardice, it was simply space, room for other versions of me. I tucked my phone face down and watched the land blur into a watercolor, and for the first time in years, my chest unclenched in a way that felt less like relief and more like permission. Lisbon unfolded like a book I hadn't known I'd been holding half open. The tiles in the Alfama shimmered in patterns I wanted to trace with my fingertips. The tram bells clicked in a rhythm that felt coaxing rather than urgent. I learned quickly that being unknown in a city is a kind of relief, a permission slip to try on new manners of being. I ate pastéis de nata at a counter that didn't ask for my backstory. I let a street musician's off-key fado fill the corner of my day and thought, for the first time in ages, that I could let feelings sit without ironing them flat. On the second day, I wandered into a little paper shop with stacks of loose-leaf stationery and a tired cat asleep on the counter. Anna, the shopkeeper, was 40-ish, ink-stained, and had a laugh like she'd been waiting for something interesting to happen. We started talking about typography because that's how my brain makes friends. Through work. I showed her a photo of the invitations I'd designed for Evan, and after a beat, she handed me a printed postcard she'd rescued from a pile of rejects. "This one," she said. "You'll like the kerning." She had the postcard framed in a way that made my name feel like an offering rather than a footnote. Anna invited me to a little collective she ran. Artists, printers, a ceramicist who made mugs with crooked handles on purpose. They drank cheap coffee and argued about supply chains as if it were the national sport. I told one of them I could make a poster, and by the end of the week, I designed a small series for their upcoming show. They paid me in cash, which felt shockingly intimate, and in a bundle of contacts for places that might hire a designer who didn't want to be invisible. There was a man, too, Tomas, who painted facades with a serious reverence for peeling paint. He had a coat that smelled faintly of diesel and a habit of saying whatever occurred to him, which was either a kindness or a reckless weapon. We walked for hours through neighborhoods full of laundry and possibility. He taught me how to sip a coffee slowly, like it was a small decision, not a refueling stop. There was no script with him, no ledger where I had to account for my usefulness. He was curious about my work in the way people are curious about other people when they suspect there's more beneath the seams. The work I did there, small, paid, public, was its own strange kind of reckoning. I was no longer the person who fixed things for others without asking for visibility. I was a woman who quoted a price and meant it. I negotiated delivery dates and told a printer no when the sample paper bled. Each refusal felt like a tiny muscle waking up. I kept a running total in my head of what I had earned. Hours, euros, small triumphs. For the first time, I saw my labor as currency that could buy me not just passage, but choice. The messages from home came in like rain on a different roof. "Hope you're having fun. Miss you." Mom texted with so many exclamation points, the punctuation seemed embarrassed. Evan sent a terse voice clip about speeches and seating, then a second one asking me to call. I let them pile up unanswered. The temptation to explain, "I left because you left me out," sat on my tongue, heavy and theatrical. I didn't want drama. I wanted boundaries that looked like silence. On the final night before I planned to return, Anna invited me to a midnight print run at a squat gallery. The machines hummed like small beasts. The air was oily and warm. As sheets rolled out, my name, Monroe, appeared stamped on a little run of posters I had designed for the group. Someone took a photo and tagged me in it the next morning. A candid of my hands in ink, the caption celebratory, in a way that didn't need justification. That image did something small and crucial. It let me see myself the way other people were starting to see me. Present, credited, paid. I'd spent years being the uncredited voice in family group chats, the bank transfer remembered, and the seat never reserved. Here, across the ocean, my name was a line item on a receipt, an author credit on a poster, a person who could refuse a favor without feeling like I'd broken the world. And then, 2 days before I was due home, my phone buzzed with a message that landed like an unexpected toll bell. "Evan, can we talk when you get back?" it read. No flourish, no apology. The silence after the sentence felt deliberate, like a stage left empty for a monologue I'd been rehearsing in the mirror. I closed the message and looked out at a city that had taught me how to be deliberate with my small joys. The climb back home suddenly felt less like a retreat and more like a decision I had the right to make on my own terms. I came back on a Tuesday because that felt purposeful, too early for dramatics, just enough time for the world at home to miss me a little and not so much that they could rewrite the story. The airport carousel spat out my suitcase, and I felt the familiar tug of gravity. Bills, a dog that greeted me like I'd been gone 3 days in a year at once, a mailbox full of junk, and one thin envelope with Evan's handwriting. Inside, a short note. "Can we talk? E." No flourish, no explanation. The lack of flourish was the point. We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Mom's, because neutral ground makes people honest or at least less theatrical. Evan arrived 10 minutes late, hair rumpled, apologetic in a way he'd practiced when he wanted something without seeming needy. He opened with the kind of small, manufactured regret that's good at filling space but bad at responsibility. "Mun, I'm sorry. It was an oversight. It got chaotic. You know how it is." I listened like I had listened to everything else, attentive, cataloging. But this time I was operating from a different ledger. Instead of protest, I slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was an itemized bill. Design services, emergency loans with dates, phone calls at 2 a.m. for tow trucks and excuses, emotional labor. Yes, I wrote it, and yes, I put a price. At the bottom, I'd typed in neat kerning, balance due, your attention or repayment. Choose one. I didn't expect payment. I expected that he'd read it and understand that I could account for myself now. He blinked, fumbling for a response that wasn't an apology that dissolved into more asking. He tried to charm. He tried to minimize. He reached across and tried to take my hand the way men do when they want to be forgiven with human contact. I let him. Then I took my hand back. "I'm not a ledger you can audit when it suits you," I said. I kept my voice even, a practiced calm that carried weight instead of volume. "I'm not your emergency fund anymore, Evan. I won't be on call to fix things you break with charm." He stammered something about family and guilt and brunches he'd planned. I told him I'd be at the gallery opening on Saturday, details he didn't ask about, and handed him a single printed ticket. It was for the show in Lisbon, where the invitations I'd designed hung with a few other pieces. I wanted him to see what his neglect looked like under lights. Word traveled faster than I expected. Mom called the first night, voice thin with a new kind of worry, less about smoothing things and more about the consequences. Aunt Mara stopped by with pie and a kind of apology that smelled like regret, but not change. Some family members asked for explanations. Others avoided my gaze like it might crack something between us. I didn't spend my days proving myself. I spent them rebuilding a boundary that looked like work. Invoices, a small book of rates, a website that wasn't free. Then something quietly satisfying happened. The Lisbon Gallery called offering to buy the invitation suite for their permanent collection. They paid more than the balance I'd sent Evan. The money was not the point, but it felt like a clean, audible acknowledgement. My labor had value outside the family altar of gratitude. I used part of the earnings to formalize my business. Licensed, insured, with a bank account on Cetus. Evan couldn't touch. The rest went into a little emergency fund of my own, a private shrine to the idea that I would never again be the only person responsible for other people's disasters. Evan wrote to ask for a favor 3 months later, something small that would have once prompted me to drop everything. I sent back a short message. "I can't help with that. I'm booked." He called, left a voicemail that was all earnestness and a practiced vulnerability. I listened to it once and then deleted it the way you delete a file you no longer need. The impulse to rescue him still lived in me like an old sweater. That is, comfortingly familiar. But it no longer fit. The real closure came not from receipts or messages, but from a small dinner I hosted in late spring. I invited Anna, Tomas, the ceramicist with crooked mugs, a few clients I'd met in Lisbon who had become friends, and my mother. I cooked clumsily but with good ingredients. We ate around my table. No speeches, no performative reconciliations, just plates passed and stories told and the little human commerce of noticing one another. Mom arrived late, eyes wet. She said quietly, "You look different, happier." I didn't say I'd learned to say no. I said, "I'm freer than I used to be." She nodded as if she'd been given a map and was only now peering at it. On the wall beside my desk, I framed the original invitation sleeve, the physical thing I'd crafted that had been used without me. It hung there like a relic, printing I was proud of and a lesson I'd learned. Sometimes I caught myself looking at it and feeling a complicated gratitude, grief for what had been invisible, pride for what I had made visible again. At night, after clients had signed contracts and invoices pinged paid, I would stand at the window with a cup of tea and watch the streetlights bloom. There was no triumphant fireworks display, no cinematic reveal. The revenge had been soft, almost surgical. I had refused to be invisible. I had spent my money on myself and invested my time in people who reciprocated. The biggest payback was simple. They could go on not seeing me, but I would no longer be the scaffolding for their lives. And in the quieter ledger that mattered, the one where I recorded my own worth instead of erasing it, I crossed off a line that had been there my whole life, available at all hours for everyone else. I left it blank and felt easier.